Today's talk is going to focus on data management planning particularly and tools that can help you to do your planning in a better way if it's the first time you are doing planning or if you have been doing it for a long time. When it comes to research data, we refer to the data that we have created during the course of our scientific activity, and this applies for any discipline. Of course, there are different sources and types of research data, and this can be generated for different purposes and through different processes. The data, as part of research, follows a model known as the data life cycle. This learning model helps to increase awareness of the scientific discovery process. If you are not familiar with this model or any of its variation, I think it's worth to explore it because each step involves good practices in data management and apply also the FAIR principles beyond the belief of data in the conventional sense, but also the tools and the workflows that led to that data. An ideal data lifecycle has around 10 steps, but of course there are many models, so it could be also less steps, but they try to cover the FAIR principles, always bearing them in mind. And of course, you can decide in which ways to implement it yourself, according to your discipline and to your project as well. We will focus on the data management planning, and this is why we're going to the first step and how you can plan better, ensuring the FAIR principles and policy compliance. This is important for you not only as a researcher when you are beginning your research, but also if you are required to come with a document for funding, and such document will involve for you to plan your data management. Part of the formulation of working in data management planning involves the creation of what we know as data management plans, which we call DMPs for short. And this is also one of the topics today. A DMP is usually defined as a document that describes what data you are expected to produce in your research project and how you're going to handle this data. Very important here, I think, is the acknowledgement that the DMP is a formal document because it will follow always guidelines or policies, has a defined structure, and also it's the product of a consensus among the actors that are involved in the creation of the DMP, meaning this is not a one person's job alone. It's your research team and can extend beyond that. If you work with partners and other colleagues, they are also involved on the data management plan. The data management plan concept is also considered a living document. This means that your project is always evolving, and it is helpful for you to always return to your DMP and make as many changes as possible at different stages of your project. It might also help you to consider or rethink some of your aspects related with the project and the data you are producing. And of course, it can always be used as a template or as an example for a DMP you need to create for the next project. If I think about how to do data management planning, which also involves the creation of the DMP, I think a very good way to begin with is if you are applying with a proposal for funding, you can always check the existing recommendations, the guidelines, and the policies of your institution or the funder itself. Nowadays, it's very common that the institutions have a dedicated place or site or perhaps an office where you can look up the guidelines to handle research data, or maybe go to someone who can help you out to deal with this, especially if it's the first time you are doing a research project and you need to implement best practices for your data management. We have the example here of the German Research Foundation, or DFG, for its acronym in German, which is the Central Research Funding Organization in Germany. If you check out the website, you will see that it provides a series of guidelines for different disciplines. Many other organizations follow these guidelines as well, and they require the researchers to comply to them. There is also, of course, besides the DFG, funding institutions that rely on their own policies. For example, the European Commission, which has guidelines, if you are aware of the Horizon program for the European research. As a second step for data management planning, creating a data management plan will be really commendable. Basically, what you should have in your data management plan is the basic information about your data collection. It's all about data and how you're going to organize your data and how your data will be used, shared, and preserved, which practices you're going to follow so your data remains on time and can be useful not only for you, but for others. With the example of the DFG, you can also have a look at the checklist for planning and description of handling research data in projects for any discipline. You will see that the main aspects are included, and this means that a DMP or a very similar document is always requesting by funding. And of course, you can always go to the funders and check if they also have templates or example of accepted DMPs. So you don't need to begin from zero. It all begins with basic information and besides the obvious, also your motivation, which here is expressed as a description or an abstract. What is your motivation for data collection? This is your project focus. And this is very important here because your DMP should be able to answer two questions. What do you want to find out and how you are planning to find it out? By providing this information, you will be stating the importance of your project to others, and it should be clear to anyone reading your DMP. This is not a general description of your topic, this is your main goal. Besides the project focus and the basic information, you should be able to provide information on the data that will be collected, on the type of data, to the file formats that you will follow. Hopefully, always open formats when possible, because we are trying to aim for open science. The approximate volume of data. An approximation is good. This matters for the future for archiving in repositories. And how, when, and where will your data be acquired and how you are processing them. So this is all part of the methodology, including, for example, which softwares are you using as well. And very important, how you're going to ensure quality in terms of accuracy, relevance, completeness, and consistency. So quality in general, not only collecting the data, but make sure the data is at its best condition. And in regards of documentation and metadata, how to read your data so others can understand and which standards your metadata are going to follow. There are general metadata schemas that apply to different disciplines, for example, the Dublin Core, and there are also specific standards, such as the EML that you see here, that are very domain specific. So you can use a mix of both if that is the case. You don't need to come up with a new standard, you just need to check the ones that are out there for you. In regards of ethical and legal compliance, you should mention how you are planning to share your data in case your data, for example, are sensitive data. If you're working with human subjects, for example, you should add also if your data can be or has certain restrictions. So can it be partially shared or just shared under certain conditions? You should also discuss the storage and the backup plan. How and where are your data going to be stored? Are they open access, hopefully, or your collaborators need an affiliation to a certain institution to access the data? And you also have to adhere which backup practices you are following during the project. So just to make sure that the data get not lost in the process of producing more data and during your research project. Preservation is to have your data for the long run. Not all the data produced in your research project you want to have preserved for the future, just specific data, but you need to say also for how long do you want your data to be preserved? And if your data has potential for other users, you should also bear that in mind. And of course, you should be talking here about cost. What is the cost of having this data preserved and for how long? And when it comes to data sharing and publication, you should also add how you're planning to share your data and which platforms you're going to use. If it's through a journal, which is a common practice, then you will need to assign a persistent identifier, or if you're going to use other means to share your data. And of course, we always need to think of responsibility. So people can always go to someone if they have questions about the data that has been produced or any other questions about your research. It would be important to include who is responsible for the production and management of the data, who is in charge of the backups. If you need a particular license here, not only for sharing, for access and for use and reuse of your data, then you should add it also in here. We usually recommend the Creative Commons licenses, but of course it depends on the type of data you are producing and many other factors. For the last point, resources that you need to bear in mind as well. This is something we usually don't consider, but usually there is additional software or hardware that you will need to buy, and you need budget for training people that are part of your team. The cost of data management and archiving can be also added to your DMP, so everyone has a view of not only the cost of the research, which is the typical budget, but other costs that might be implicit. If you comply to the steps that are here, then you are producing a good data management plan. Every data producer and data reuser, which is not only integrating secondary data, but creating our data within the research project, is also involved. If you are partner in a research program, you should also be involved. So this is not a one person's job. With a DMP, you save time because you really know or have an approximation of the data you will be dealing with and how you're going to handle it. So you're thinking before, not only about that, but also foresee future problems or challenges when collecting or dealing with your data. The DMP is also useful for others because it makes it possible for them, researchers or someone else, to discover, to interpret, and to reuse your data. This helps the scientific practice because it allows new discoveries and also increase the visibility of your own research. The DMP will help you also to clarify both the cost for your data publication and archiving, but also to specify which are the access conditions to your data. So here you get to decide that. You should also write one because it helps to meet grant requirements. So the trend right now is that a growing number of funding agencies, journal publishers, and institutions require a specification on how the data was produced and how the data will be archived and shared. In other words, they're asking for a data management plan or a similar document to provide together with the proposal. If you are not convinced with all of this, I can give you the good news that a DMP also counts as a publication of your own. So you can have that in mind. We have an example that we created for biodiversity. You can have a look at your own time of the GFBio model, the data management plan, and then see not only the structure that I mentioned before, but also with applicability in a real case. Do it for the first time can be tricky. It gets easier on time. You do need to dedicate some time to that, but it will save you time in the long run.